All right, so we're recording now. Hopefully that's picking up the shared screen. We'll see later. So this is QLOS version 7.0 _ BP for building performance. The building performance part of things really is just this top section, asking for that client information, the business name, the business use, so we know, is this like retail or is this manufacturing or what is it, and then addresses, EEN company name, utility accounts if you have them. If not, we can look them up, and then test in, test out dates. So the core of QLOS is still the same. The building data section is just about the building, how big it is, how tall it is. And I guess I'll just also start by reminding that the yellow cells are the intended input cells. White cells are not for input. They're usually a calculated value. And there are some exceptions to that I'll go over. And the orange or whatever color this is and this blue are calculated values as well. So just keep in mind, yellow cells typically are they're inputs you need to make. The exception to that is when you want to overwrite a formula, and the most common exception to that would be if you just want to type in the area and not let the length times the width minus the windows be part of how you do it. That's totally fine. Just remember that if you're overwriting the formulas, it needs to be a net area. You take away any windows or doors that are part of that wall. But yeah, that's probably the only place you'll really get into editing non-yellow cells. You could change the names of all these locations to whatever you want, to be more specific, so that you can see where you're putting your numbers. I'll get into a couple different ways to use QLOS. That would kind of make it a little easier or a little more comprehensive, depending on what you're going after. Before I get into that, just the tabs below. So QLOS does have a room-by-room heat load estimator. It is based on the inputs you put in here about the building, and then on the room-by-room page, you actually go into detail, and you can rename these to whatever rooms you want. And then you'd say, okay, well, this room has so much north wall, so much east wall, south wall, ceiling, etc. And you start building out the heat load and dividing the heat load into the different rooms. The heat load that is calculated back on this building page gets divided room by room by your inputs here. We're not going to get into that really, but that's what that is. There is an R value calculator. So you can estimate the actual value of the assembly, because QLOS is just a UA delta T type of calculator. It's more important to get the assembly values, and this is especially important if there's any steel anywhere, or if you're adding any continuous insulation. The R values are, substantially less without continuous insulation. So here's just an example of how you could use that calculator, and I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on it. The way it's set up is that you have an existing assembly, and then you add either insulation to the cavity or insulation to the continuous. That will then result in these non-edited cells, including these input values. And then it'll calculate an average assembly R value. So the default is that 20% of the walls or whatever assembly is framing and 80% is cavity. You can change that if you know there's a lot more framing or less framing than typical, but that's pretty typical. If you're gutting something or removing insulation instead of adding to, you can just ignore the added part, and you know this is sort of cumulative from this one to this one equals the lower one. You can just enter your values directly into these light green cells if you're taking something out and making it different altogether. And there's just two calculators just to give you more than one. You can copy and paste in as many other ones as you want if you want to. Other calculators, there is a fuel data input. You don't have to use these. This is just to give you a sense of, you know, how much fuel is being used, so you can figure out what the annual amount is based on deliveries. In this example, it was heat and hot water. And this little purple cell is would have to be, you'd have to manually alter depending on your dates that you input here. But this example, there's using an average gallons per day over the course of however many years this was, times 365 is the average amount of gallons a year. The base load was estimated by taking the average of the delivery after the summer. So you can see like this delivery here is October and the last one was May. So that was pretty much all domestic hot water. So that's, figuring out those averages, taking that 1.4, that 1.2, looks like usage went up 2.4, maybe that's a little heating. Taking the average of all those, saying, okay, that's 1.5. Okay, 1.5 times 365 is the base load, and then subtracting that out of the total gives you your amount of heating fuel. So this is just a calculator you can use to try to get to that answer of how much heating do they use, which is an input back on the building page. There's different ways. You don't have to use this calculator. DWHR, this is drain water heat recovery. You might not use this much, but it's here both to raise awareness, but also to give you a way to estimate that if you want to try to see that in a project. Window air leakage estimates. This is just something I've found when doing some storm window work to kind of get an idea as to what savings we could attribute to storm windows versus anything else. There's some window U-factor defaults here as well. So go ahead and use these if you need to or want to, but really all the action you need to focus on is back on the building tab. So before I dive into that, does anybody have any questions they want to ask at this point? Okay. You just gave me a chance to sip some coffee. All right, so building data, we talked about that. Weather-related input would be next. This heating degree day value. This works the same way as Hero. You pick your heating degree day town, and there might be some that aren't on there, just like in Hero. So you pick your closest climate town to the one you're working in. That pulls in a approximate heating degree day value, and then there's a correction factor, which is the same as the Hero shell savings adjustment factor. This is in percent instead of decimals, so 50% instead of 0.5. That gives you an adjusted value. That's a calculated value. And then these two temperatures are just for the design load side of things. Fuel price data to give accurate customer cost savings estimates. And then over here on the right is a little heating fuel usage data. So you can put in your number of gallons of oil, your cords of wood, and have it calculate a total MMBTU of the building. One thing that's different in this version, since I've added this data calculator, is I linked this cell over here to the result. So you can use this calculator and have the result linked directly back here, or you could enter it right here if you have it calculated somewhere else. But this is intended to be the actual annual energy use for heating of the building you're working on. And that's important to give a reality check of what the estimate is.
Matt, no pellet information on there?
Oh, so here's the note on pellets. Change 20 to 16.4 if you're entering tons of pellets.
Okay.
Doing wood and pellets, calculate it on a napkin and plug in the number.
Yeah, right. Okay.
It wouldn't be that hard to add, but that's just what we have right now. So this reconciliation bit, the QLOS was made and designed to model the entire building. Unlike Hero, which is basically QLOS in the background, Hero was just asking for line by line, whatever you're changing in the building, model that. You can use QLOS either way. And what I'd say is, if you want to be accurate, model the entire building. And when you're done with your model, this modeled use should equal or be very close to the actual use. And that reconciliation, that true up to bills, is what makes an estimate accurate. Truing that up is a whole different art and skill. It involves making sure your existing R values are right, possibly some correction factor work on each item or one or two of them, possibly a correction factor of the entire building based on heating use or low use. Those are primarily the things you'd go through to try to reconcile. Now, we're not asking that happen in building performance at this point in time. So you can still use it like Hero and give a line by line view. If you're only changing the attic, say, then just enter the attic information in, and the blower door information in, and that'll still give you a result. We still want you to put in this total use though, because we're doing the same kind of check we were doing with Hero. And down here in the results section, which we'll get to more, but this is a percent of actual usage, which is your modeled savings as a percent of this actual number up here. And so obviously if you're saying that's 100% or even 50%, you're maybe off on some of your inputs. And that's just the reality check, just like we used in Hero. So that's the kind of setup and overview. Then you start getting into the details, and like I said, you could enter, every single wall here. It will calculate the length times the width. Sorry, this is more like 8. This would be like 42, 28. 2. This is just like a simple building. This is how you would set it up. And then give yourselves your R values. Let's say you did the calculated assembly values. But maybe you only improved one of those walls. You could put in that. You don't have to put proposed values in anything you didn't change. And so here you would see, okay, well, that one wall yields these savings, and going across these different columns, this is the existing calculated usage. It's in load, not including the heating system efficiency. This is the proposed building usage, again in load, not including the building system efficiency, heating system efficiency. And then the difference is the savings, and again, not including the system efficiency. If you go over into the colored section here, you can see the headline with old system efficiency. This is the savings, including, all the loss up the chimney that you'd have to make up for. And then the kilowatt hour savings is the same that Hero did, which is just 5 times the number of BTUs that you've saved. If you also had AC, you'd get some results over in the blue section, and I'll jump into AC a little bit later. So then you go down, you continue doing your model. Maybe this is 28 by 42, and this is 28, and you're getting it up to 49. You could enter your windows in here, and the way I like to do windows instead of length times width is, let's say we have 15 square feet, 15 square foot of windows. That's the kind of the average size. And you could say, well, there's 2 there, there's 5 there, there's 3 there, there's 2 there. And then give them their R value. And if you notice, when I entered those areas in, it's subtracted from the wall area. So we'd have a net wall area. Then you also notice this number here is starting to rise. It's getting closer to the actual amount of use. So, this is a made up building, so we're not going to actually try to reconcile it. But that would be what you'd look for, is like, oh, how close to actual are they using? Maybe you put a couple storm windows on here, so this would go up to 3, or whatever your storm window type is. Then we get into the foundation. So foundation, we do need always there to be a depth below grade. That is part of the calculation of the Earth's R value that goes into the heat load. So if you were to overwrite this to say, yeah, I know the area, I don't want those calculations to tell me what the area is, I'm just going to type that in. You still need to put a number in here. This is that depth below grade value that will impact the heat loss. And then you have to think back to your Hero days, or what you know about buildings, and choose an R value that is including the stone, and the value of the materials in the foundation wall. And the general guidance is that a default of 3 will be conservative. You could go a little lower than that, but don't go below 2 for sure. So then let's talk about this column or row, column H. This is a correction factor column, and it is to adjust line by line, similar to how the heating degree day adjustment adjusts the whole building. The main times you'll use this is like an unheated basement, where you'd set it to 0.5 if it was an unheated basement, or set it up to 1 if it was a heated basement. This is again the same as Heroes saying yes, it's heated, or no, it's not heated. But you have to actually put the number in here. And if you're during true up, you need to raise usage. Maybe that's more heated than unheated. You could put that up at 0.6 or 0.7. Or if it's a heated basement and you had it at 1 and it's over, you're over on your model, maybe it's not quite as heated as fully heated. You can drop it down.
Or if it's half of the basement is heated.
Yeah, half and halves. You have to figure out what the right mix is.
Yeah. Okay.
Because this doesn't divide basements in
right.
halves. It just has above grade and below grade halves.
Yeah, and the chances of it being half is, that you would have to do it by percentage. Right.
Yeah, and I would just play with that a little bit with related to how
Yep.
you're estimating your fuel use.
Yep.
And Matt, that's true too with a combination of crawl space and full basement.
Yeah, a combination of crawl space and full basement. I mean, you just have to put well, you mean like if you have a crawl space and a heated basement?
Yes.
And you want to combine them both. Yeah, you're going to have to kind of find the right mix. And what you might consider is if you are only insulating the crawl space and not the basement, then focus the attributes on the crawl space, because that's where the savings is going to happen. And don't try to mix the two up.
And you just treat it like a short basement.
Yeah. If you do, what you might do is include the crawl space as above grade, because usually they are primarily above grade but unheated. And so this above grade section might have a lot more area on it, but the below grade has the basement. So maybe this is like 260 here because there's a big crawl space. And this is a heated basement, so you could say 1 over here, but this is a crawl space that's unheated. And that might give you a better mix of how things are actually playing out. It's still, this is trying to get close. This is not, a very detailed modeling engine.
Is there a handbook for it?
No.
Like I know we have our recording, so that's going to act as our handbook. Yeah. Okay.
The handbook is click in the cell.
Yeah. No,
and see what it's doing.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
You use Excel, okay, well, it's area times R value, divided by R value. So it's, the handbook is really understanding Excel and knowing what it's doing.
Understood. Yeah.
And then blower door numbers. This should be pretty straightforward. This target would be the improved if this was a test out. But again, if it's preliminary, then it's your target. You have correction factor here as well, which you might use more often than other correction factors, because a lot of air leakage is possibly unconditioned space air leakage, especially in the case of the leaky crawl space or the leaky basement. So you can adjust that down some. The shielding LBL number, is it normal or exposed or well shielded? You scroll down, we get into the heating systems. So it allows 2, just put the predominant 2 in. A percent of existing, this should total 100. And I did put in a splits up here, percent of usage, that you could carry over to the heating system page. This is basically how Hero split things up too. So you could see, okay, what percent propane based on my fuel inputs, and then add that, enter that percent here. And then the approximate efficiency of each of those systems. If you want to do proposed fuels switches for the customer, then that's fine. We don't include those savings in building performance. But you can use it to give them some estimates. And then we get into some of the results we have down here. 2 ways of looking at air leakage, either by CFM 50 per square foot or by ACH 50. The thing I would say about this is the CFM 50 per square foot. If you don't enter all the square footage, then you're not getting the accurate number. So if you use it just as a line by line, I'm just doing the attic, not going to put anything else in, then this number is not going to mean anything. And then let's see, so hot water information here. based on if you want to model any hot water use. And then we have the heating results here. And this is the existing load, the existing consumption, which is the reason that the consumption is lower in this case is because we have a 250% efficient heat pump. If this were 0 and this is 100, you'd see that normally this is the case, the consumption is higher than the load because you have efficiency loss of your systems. And then this is the those improved values, and the difference is the savings. So 26.6 million BTUs savings here. Looking back at usage, that's 15% of actual usage. Again, that number comes from up here. How did we get that model so accurate? That's great. That's what it should be like. So this model saying, hey, 15% savings for that scope of work. On the cooling side, the only thing this cooling is a very rough way of looking at the cooling savings that you'd get from shell improvements. You're putting in a cooling degree day factor, and this is the value that is default. Now, if you want to look at weather data, you could put in a different value there. There's a correction factor, which in the cooling world is actually the other side of 1. In the heating world, you lower it below 1. That's the equivalent to the 0.5 or the 50%. And this
Matt,
this,
so the cooling degree days don't come from the town selection. You have to enter those.
Yeah, there's just a single default in there right now. So if you wanted to change that to be more accurate to your location, you'd have to, go to busy B or heating degree day lookup, cooling degree day lookup, and find those numbers. It's going to be similar to that. So then you correction factor, maybe there's a bunch of glass on the west side, or there's a bunch of refrigerators inside that are causing a bunch of internal gain to happen. Use your judgment. 0.108 is the default adjustment. You put your SEER value in for your AC system. So if this is a heat pump, that's 22 or 25 or something pretty high. If it's an old AC system, maybe it's 11, or maybe it's even lower. Conditions or cooled square feet. So you can either enter the percent directly here, or if you enter a square footage of cooled area, it will calculate that percent based on your input of total floor area that you did in the beginning. And this percent is directly related to how much savings you're going to see. So if you're only cooling 1 room, for instance, it's going to dramatically lower the cooling estimates. And then the only thing this is doing is, the formulas for Q loss are UAT or for load and UA heating degree day times 24. And the only thing this is doing is backing out the heating degree day value and pulling in the cooling degree day value. That gives the savings in a load, MMBTU load. Then the kWh savings include the efficiency of the unit and convert it to kilowatt hours. Then the cost savings is simply kilowatt hours times the price you put in for electricity. So that's cooling, and then it's line itemed each one, subtotal for the envelope, and then a subtotal for the air leakage, and then the total at the bottom.
So Matt, am I missing where it's going to calculate what the electrical consumption is for cooling that we can sort of compare to their bills?
It's not capturing that anywhere. So I suppose, no, this is for heating. So yeah, you would have to do that manually. And I suppose that's something we could add here as a little double check. We could add a little row right down here for, how many kilowatt hours of cooling. So you'd have to disag the bill and then compare. Like Hero did, yeah. But right now that would be a manual check. And I mean, what I would do is I'd look at the bill, and if you can't see cooling, don't even bother entering it. If you don't see cooling in the bill, unless there's some, electric heat or something that's making the bill flat year round.
Right. Yeah, I have the one I'm working on is an office building that, not during COVID, but normally will have 20 or 30 people in it, and it's a large space with essential air. And I think that's a big part of their electric bills, certainly in the summer months.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I can't emphasize enough how rough guess this way of doing cooling savings is. It's getting a number, and it's definitely a good idea to look at their existing usage to see if an office building might be really hard to tease out what their AC load is, especially if they're using any kind of wintertime electric use.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Okay, and then the last thing is building performance incentive calculator down here. This is the current incentive option for building performance. It is probably going to change in the near future, but this is what it is right now. And what I need to emphasize about this is that it's a calculator basing the square foot on the total of all square feet you enter here. So I would, if you're using it as a line by line and you're only entering things that are being improved, it'll work as it should. If you are entering the whole building and only improving certain lines, then what you'd want to do down here is write a new formula to sum up your square foot of treated area that's incentive eligible, and plop that right in there. So you could, say equals this one, or not that one, actually, just this one, and maybe there's a basement. You put that one. And that will sum up the square footage of treated area that's incentive eligible, and then it'll calculate right. It's just a calculator. That's why I labeled it such. It's not a estimate. And I think that is the abbreviated version of what is QLOS doing and how do you use it. So happy to go into detail on anything if you want to open it up to questions.
So Matt, if you've got doors with a lot of glass, do you enter those in the window section, I'm assuming, or do the doors get subtracted out?
Yeah, I'd enter them as the window if it's a glass door in particular, and you might even go so far as entering opaque areas in doors and glazing areas in windows. You could do it either way. I mean, if it's a bad door, it's probably not going to be much better than a window anyway, so you could just lump doors with windows. It's not doing any cooling load estimates, so the solar gain is not included at all. It's just R value, U value.
Okay. And one last thing, how do we submit this now?
Email it to the energy consultant that you're normally working with. So is for Heat Squad, is that always Jeff Manny? I don't know.
It is for us down here, well, at least for me. I don't know about Nick, but not Sally has Walter.
Sally has Walter. Okay, yeah. So Sally submitted to Walter. Rick submitted to Jeff. I did add a column here for project costs that you could put towards whatever the improvements are. I would say if you could use that if it makes sense, or submit the invoice or invoices, which we're going to want anyway. So depending on how itemized the invoice is, I think we can usually work with the invoice to get what we need. Make sense?
I think so. I'll let you know once I get through it.
Yep,
Okay.
it makes sense.
Great. Oh, and Sally, I thought I'd maybe stop the recording now and I could show you the. Let me stop recording first.